TentGirl.com is a domain that 30 years ago began displaying this eerie sketch of a woman, her identity, a mystery that police tried and failed for decades to solve. That was until one dedicated, bordering on obsessed internet sleuth finally cracked the case. It all began with a horrifying discovery on the night of May 17, 1968, in Georgetown, Kentucky. A well digger named Wilbur Riddle was walking around Route US 25 while he waited for his boss to show up. He was scanning the ground for discarded telephone pole insulators, an easy way to make a few bucks back in the day. But then, something unusual caught his eye. Amid the scattered glass bottles and debris, a large, oddly shaped bundle reflected the headlights of passing cars. A green tarp bunched up in the brush. Strange, he thought, moving in for a closer look. Curious, he nudged the bundle with his foot, sending it rolling down the embankment. But when his foot touched the bundle, instead of feeling hard like scrap metal or some other trash, it felt soft, too soft. The tarp unraveled slightly as it tumbled, and for a brief moment, Wilbur thought it might be a dead animal. However, a dread crept into his gut, and so he forced himself to step closer and investigate. He prodded the bundle again, and this time, it felt harder. Focusing his eyes on that spot, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and his throat tightened as a realization slowly dawned on him. It appeared to be a human leg. And the hard part he had just kicked, it was the head. Immediately after seeing the macabre sight, Wilbur hopped into his truck and drove like a man possessed to the nearest gas station, which was 2 miles away. There, he frantically called the authorities about his discovery. Shortly after, Sheriff Bobby Vance, along with Deputy Jimmy Williams and Coroner Kenneth Grant, met with the still-shaken well digger, who led them to the body's location. As is protocol, they asked Wilbur what he was doing in the backwoods of town, for which he replied that he was an assistant well digger and that he, along with his boss, were hired on a drilling project nearby. He stated that since his boss left a note that he was going to be late and that he shouldn't start without him, he thought it was a good opportunity to scrounge up sellable parts. After the initial questioning, the police asked Wilbur to show them where he discovered the alleged body. As soon as they arrived, an overwhelming stench filled the air, a smell that left no doubt about what lay ahead. Cutting open the fabric, they uncovered the body of a woman in an advanced state of decomposition, laid bare before the horrified officers. Upon initial investigation, they were unable to identify the victim, as she had no personal belongings to reveal her name, only what seemed to be a small towel draped over her shoulder with no notable identifying marks, and thus, authorities gave her a haunting name, Tent Girl, a reference to the fact that the green canvas that her body was wrapped in was a fabric often used to make tents at the time. No other physical evidence was found at the crime scene to provide investigators with a solid lead. With the initial investigation complete, the body was taken to St. Joseph Hospital in Lexington. There, Dr. James McClellan undertook the unenviable task of determining how this young woman met her tragic end. The autopsy report detailed that the victim was approximately 5 feet 1 inch tall and weighed around 110 pounds. She had reddish-brown hair, a noticeable gap between her front teeth, and was estimated to be in her late teens. To make matters even more difficult, Tent Girl had no other distinguishing marks to help investigators uncover her identity. Furthermore, advanced decomposition made it challenging to produce an accurate sketch, as the discoloration of the eyes and the altered shape of the nose distorted the original features. It was one of the worst hands an investigator could be dealt, the last thing they want in such a gruesome case. It was approximated that she had been dead for anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks. No bullet wounds, stab wounds, or signs of strangulation were found. Due to the body's advanced decomposition, the specific events leading to her death by asphyxiation could not be confirmed. Investigators theorized that Tent Girl may have been struck on the head with a blunt object, rendering her dazed or unconscious. The killer then wrapped her body tightly in the green tarp she was found in, securing both ends and dumping her over the embankment. Trapped inside the tarp, unable to move, see, or call for help in her weakened state, it was believed that the likely cause of death was asphyxiation. A detailed sketch by Covington patrolman Harold Musser was later released to the public in the hope that someone would recognize the young woman. With no other leads, police could only pin their hopes on the sketch, that someone would come forward to identify Tent Girl. If not, she might become just another name lost in the shuffle of unsolved cases. On top of that, there was a killer out there on the loose who, for all they knew, could strike again. But if they could identify the victim, perhaps it would lead them on a trail to the killer. Immediately after Tent Girl's sketch was released to the public, more than a dozen people arrived at the Frankfurt police station wondering if she was their missing loved one. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you looked at it, each person left either disappointed or with renewed hope that their loved one could still be out there, alive and well. In the weeks that followed, police received over 100 calls, each one carrying a desperate voice on the other end of the line. Out of all these potential leads, only 3 showed promise. The first was the case of Loretta Jean Slusser, who was reported missing by her family about a year before the discovery of Tent Girl. A recent update to her case was a reported sighting in Florence, Kentucky, roughly 60 miles from Georgetown. Loretta, who would have been around 16 at the time, matched the description almost to a T, even down to the cavities in her 2 upper front teeth. Miss Slusser's mother was asked to travel to Frankfurt to meet with the state detective in charge of the investigation and provide more details. However, during the interview, it was revealed that Miss Slusser was 5 feet 4 inches tall and not 5 feet 1 inch like the unidentified victim. This immediately took the wind out of the mother and the detective's sails. And then there was no significant update for the Slusser case that we could find. Unfortunately, it seems that she may have become another statistic in the hundreds of unsolved missing person cases locked away in dusty file cabinets. Fortunately, the Tent Girl case would not share the same fate, at least not forever. The second major lead in the investigation pointed to a missing girl from Pasadena named Debbie Crane, last seen on March 3, 1968. Witnesses reported seeing her with 2 men, her boyfriend Carl Colby and his older brother Floyd Colby. This lead came from Detective Sergeant Miller of the Maryland Police, who had come across the Tent Girl case. After seeing the release sketch, he noticed striking similarities between Tent Girl and Debbie Crane. Miller reached out to Chief Detective Lieutenant Algan Roberts in Kentucky, who immediately cross-referenced Crane's description with Tent Girl's, and the similarities were too significant to ignore. Lieutenant Roberts requested that Sergeant Miller escort Debbie's family to Georgetown for an official identification. On June 13, 1968, Debbie's aunt, Velma Crane, made the difficult trip. It was undoubtedly a long and stressful journey, her mind likely plagued by the dreadful possibility of confirming her worst fears. For 2 grueling hours, Velma examined autopsy images, searching for any familiar feature. But with the body badly decomposed, she couldn't positively identify Tent Girl as her niece. Still, there was hope. Debbie's dental records were obtained and initial comparisons suggested a possible match. Just as it seemed the mystery might finally be solved, an anonymous phone call threw everything into question. A man with a gruff voice contacted Sergeant Miller, insisting that Debbie Crane was alive and well in Bradford, Pennsylvania. Before Miller could ask any questions, the caller abruptly hung up. Determined to verify the claim, Miller traveled to Bradford, and to his surprise, he found Debbie and Carl Colby living comfortably, completely unaware of the chaos unraveling 500 miles away. The couple was brought back to Maryland, where they announced to Debbie's parents their plans to marry. Though this lead ultimately ended in another dead end for Tent Girl, on the flip side, Kentucky police had unintentionally helped reunite a daughter with her family, giving at least one family a happy ending. Just when it seemed like the trail to Tent Girl's identity was growing cold, a new call came in from a distraught mother that could potentially solve this case once and for all. She was searching for her 15-year-old daughter, Doris Dittmar. Based on her description of Doris, it once again seemed highly possible that her daughter could be Tent Girl. Every piece of the puzzle seemed to fall neatly into place, and even without being able to verify the body due to its advanced stage of decomposition, Doris's mother began to believe, with a heavy heart, that Tent Girl might actually be her missing daughter. However, just as police were about to release the body to the Dittmars for a proper burial, that prospective door was slammed shut. Doris Dittmar's daughter was found alive and well. As it turned out, she had run away with her boyfriend, frustrated by her mother's constant meddling and nagging about her personal affairs. Another missing daughter who turned out to have only ran away with her boyfriend, leaving the police frustratingly back to square one. These 3 leads were a bust, so they needed to look at the case from a different angle. Kentucky police uncovered similarities to another murder case in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. The lifeless body of 16-year-old Candace Clothier was found wrapped in a canvas tarp roughly a month prior to the discovery of Tent Girl. Was it possible that Tent Girl wasn't the first victim of her killer? Both cases involve the body of a young woman found wrapped in a canvas material. While it can certainly be nothing more than pure coincidence, any clue or lead at this point had to be explored by the authorities. A sample of the tarp used in the Clothier case was sent to the Kentucky State Police Department for analysis. When the results came in, investigators were disappointed to find that the lead might have been a red herring. The fabric in the Clothier case turned out to be from a canvas duffel bag, not the tent-like material used in the other case. Moreover, Candace Clothier's death was ruled an accidental drug overdose, further separating the two investigations. The Clothier case proved to another potential dead end for Kentucky police, as while the two canvas materials were similar, nothing else was discovered to further connect the two murder cases. And just like that, Sheriff Bobby Vance and the Kentucky State Police were back to where they started. Once again, Tent Girl remained a distorted face without a name. Over a month had passed since the body's discovery, and the police hotline dedicated to inquiries about the case had gone from receiving hundreds of calls to zero. It appeared that the moment that police dreaded had finally arrived. Tent Girl was soon to become yet another unsolved case to be filed away and forgotten. Unable to shake a sense that Tent Girl's story wasn't over, Harold Muller spent weeks carefully studying images from the autopsy before drawing a new sketch of the unidentified victim, believing it to be a closer representation of the young woman's appearance in life. This time, Muller gave her face a rounder shape with less prominent cheekbones. What remained consistent, however, was the cavity in her upper front teeth that caused a noticeable gap. That, Muller pointed out, would be the key detail in identifying the victim. With that, Kentucky police released an updated sketch to the public. Then, the authorities did pretty much the only thing they could think of: sit and wait. Over the next couple of months, the case of Tent Girl slowed down to a crawl. Occasionally, there would be new findings such as forensics being able to lift a partial fingerprint, a painstaking process considering the advanced decomposition of the body. However, this new evidence was like uncovering a lone puzzle piece in a sprawling 1,000-piece mystery. It's something, but it wasn't remotely enough to give investigators a direction of where to go next. 8 months passed, and Georgetown officials were no closer to uncovering Tent Girl's identity, let alone finding her killer. By January 1969, authorities were on the verge of giving up. In an interview with the Kentucky Post, county attorney and lead investigator Virgil Pryor reluctantly admitted that Tent Girl may never be identified. A few months later, Master Detective, a true crime magazine, published an article about the unsolved case of Tent Girl, hoping to reach a wider audience and generate new leads. While its publication initially led nowhere, what no one could have predicted was that this very issue would become a catalyst for a major breakthrough. Exactly 29 years and 11 months later. As the case went cold, responsibility for the investigation fell to the Scott County Sheriff's Office in Kentucky, and over the years, it was passed on from one investigator to another. But with no viable leads, it remained unsolved. And so, buried beneath a nameless tombstone, she was remembered not by a loving inscription from family or friends, but by cold, clinical details. Everything she had been, her identity, her story, was reduced to words taken from her autopsy report, punctuated by a melancholic declaration. Tent Girl, found May 17, 1968, on U.S. Highway 25 North, died about April 26 to May 3, 1968. Age, about 16 to 19 years. Height, 5 foot 1 inch. Weight, 110 to 115 pounds. Reddish-brown hair, unidentified. And in this limbo is where Tent Girl would remain for the next 3 decades. October 1987. Todd Matthews, a 17-year-old factory worker, was on his way to meet up with friends to hang out for the evening. With Halloween just around the corner, the group decided to swap scary stories. They shared the usual ghost tales, the kind you would expect around a campfire. But then, it was Lori Ann's turn. Todd, who was undeniably smitten with her, hung on to every word. But Lori wasn't telling an over-the-top urban legend. No, her story was different. It was real. A gruesome crime that had haunted her own father for years. You see, Lori Ann's full name was Lori Ann Riddle, and her father was Wilbur Riddle, the man who discovered the body of Tent Girl. That night would set Todd Matthews on a path he never could have anticipated. And as fate would have it, Lori Ann would also become his future wife. From that night on, Todd became determined to uncover the identity of Tent Girl. This drive may have been shaped by his own past. As it turned out, he had a brother and sister who passed away as infants. He knew the pain of losing loved ones in ways that felt unfair and unresolved. He empathized with Tent Girl and believed that she, along with her family, deserved closure and to have whoever did this to her put to justice. Her tragic story lingered in his mind, planting the seeds of an obsession, one that would push him to search for answers, no matter how impossible and pointless it seemed. But how could a young, inexperienced kid take on a mystery that even seasoned investigators failed to solve? With his curiosity piqued, Todd dove into the case head first. He pored over stacks of old newspaper clippings, read through interviews, and wrote down every detail, committing them to memory. Wanting a first-hand account, he turned to his future father-in-law, Wilbur Riddle. Maybe, with a fresh set of eyes, Todd could spot something investigators had missed. During their talks, one particular clue stood out: Tent Girl's age. Reports consistently stated that she was likely in her late teens, but Mr. Riddle, haunted by the image of that night, could swear she looked older than that. Had investigators fixated too much on this estimate, unintentionally narrowing their search? It was a thought Todd couldn't shake as he listened to Riddle's account of May 17, 1968. In addition, there was the towel that was found with the body. What at first may have seemed to be an ordinary towel of little to no significance might actually have been the type commonly used as an infant's diaper. Armed with this new detail, Todd shifted his investigation in an entirely new direction. What if Tent Girl wasn't a teenager as originally believed? What if she was actually a mother and an adult woman? Todd pressed on, chasing the truth with the relentless hunger of a detective in one of those dime store pulp magazines that he read as a kid. But this was the 80s. There was no internet, no easily accessible digital database, just sweat, persistence, and miles of paperwork to sift through. He tracked every possible thread, linking Tent Girl to other missing persons cases, always with the hope that one would be that crucial piece of the puzzle. And each time, he ended up right where he started, staring at a grave with no name. For the next 10 years, this became his life, a ritual of obsession, a marathon where the finish line seemed to keep moving further ahead. The frustration gnawed at him, the same thought looping in his mind. I'm close, I know I am. But the truth was like a puff of smoke, always within arm's reach, yet impossible to hold. It had already put a strain on his marriage due to the piling phone bills and travel expenses. His wife, Lori, could not wrap her head around this obsession that Todd had for this particular case. This frustration, which was understandable, led to regular arguments. Arguments that just got worse as time went by. Arguments that Todd himself couldn't even fully justify. But for Todd, this was not an obsession. It had become an obligation. But during this time, he made a crucial decision. As much as he felt it was his duty to uncover the truth about Tent Girl's identity, he refused to let his obsession take priority over his loved ones. The countless hours he dedicated to this personal mission were not all for naught, though. Over the years, he transformed from an inexperienced amateur, armed with only determination, into a more methodical and seasoned investigator, developing a sharp eye for detail and a more structured approach to his search. And so, every night, after his family was in bed, he retreated to his makeshift office, poring over every piece of evidence, searching for patterns. He wasn't just looking for clues. He was trying to find the one connection that could finally give his investigation a clear path forward. After a while, Todd felt like he was running in circles. But then, a new tool emerged that changed everything. By the early 1990s, the internet was slowly becoming an integral part of society. Todd Matthews recognized its potential immediately, not just as a new technology, but as a powerful tool to connect people in an instant, making it easier than ever to share information across vast distances. With email, he could now contact sources faster than ever before. Government agency records were suddenly at his fingertips. Reaching out to media networks was no longer a slow, tedious process. The internet wasn't just changing the way people communicated, it was transforming the way investigations were conducted. And for someone as relentless as Todd, this wasn't just an advantage, it was a game changer. Determined to put this new tool to use, Todd launched TentGirl.com in 1997. The domain is sold now and contains vastly different content, but back then, this is where he compiled every piece of information he had gathered about the case. Every detail, every clue was carefully documented and made available to the public. A decade's worth of investigation, now just a click away for the growing network of like-minded individuals eager to help. Each night, he spent hours reading through messages and working with other internet detectives, searching for that one connection that could finally solve the mystery of Tent Girl's identity. Then, 1 year later, a missing persons listing appeared on his screen, one that stopped him in his tracks. His gut told him to take a closer look. It was an evening like any other for Todd. Once everyone had gone to sleep, he settled into his usual routine, checking emails, scrolling through countless missing persons listings, and scanning for anything that might stand out. His eyes burned from hours of staring at the screen. Dozens of posts blurred together, none matching the keywords he had been searching for. Then, one entry seemed to surface from the depths of his screen, almost as if it had been waiting for him to find it. 3 words stopped him in his tracks. Lexington, 1967, missing. The post was by a woman named Rosemary Westbrook. She was searching for her missing sister, Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor. It read, "My sister Barbara has been missing from our family since the latter part of 1967. She has brown hair, brown eyes, is around 5 feet 2 inches tall, and was last seen in the Lexington, Kentucky area. If you have any information, please contact me at the address posted." If he had gone with the original assumption that the tent girl was a teenager, he might have ignored this. But she was marked as 24 at the time she went missing. She was still young, and could have also been a mother. A ripple of excitement surged through Todd. Even before contacting Westbrook, his gut told him this was it. He had finally done it. He had finally uncovered the identity of Tent Girl. His hands trembled as he typed a reply, his mind racing faster than his fingers could move. The moment he hit send, a rush of adrenaline overtook him. He shot up from his chair, nearly stumbling in the process, and bolted straight to the bedroom to tell his wife. "Lori, wake up!" he shouted. "I found her!" Todd and Rosemary talked at length about her sister. Together, they meticulously compared every known detail. The height, the hair color, even the cavity on the upper front teeth. Everything matched. But Todd knew better than to get ahead of himself. He and the professional detectives who had worked on the case prior to his involvement had all been here before. Hopeful leads that ultimately led nowhere. This time, though, there was another technological game changer: DNA testing, a tool investigators never had back then. If they were right, they were on the verge of solving a 3-decades-old mystery. But if they were wrong, could his resolve withstand another disappointment? Todd helped Rosemary reach out to the Kentucky State Forensic Medical Examiner, but they weren't exactly eager to entertain his request. You have to remember this was the early days of the internet, and if amateur cyber sleuths aren't taken seriously now, they certainly weren't then. But, of course, Todd wasn't one to back down, especially not now when he felt they were this close to the truth after spending nearly 2 decades chasing it. With persistence and a growing pile of compelling evidence, Kentucky officials finally began to see it. That this guy might actually be onto something. Investigators exhumed the remains of Tent Girl to conduct a DNA test. Using samples from Rosemary Westbrook herself and from Tent Girl's teeth and bones, forensic examiners meticulously cross-referenced the data, searching for a definitive match that would confirm that she was indeed her sister. But for the next few weeks, Todd Matthews, Rosemary Westbrook, and the investigators could do nothing but wait for the results. And then, on April 26, 1998, nearly 30 years after her body was found, the DNA came back as a match. The Tent Girl finally had a name. She was Rosemary's sister, Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor, born September 12, 1943, in East St. Louis, St. Clair County, Illinois. She was just 24 years old at the time of her death. With the pivotal piece of the puzzle finally in place, one question remained: who killed Barbara and left her discarded like trash on the side of the road nearly 30 years ago? And why? Now armed with her identity, investigators uncovered multiple key details. Barbara was married to George Earl Taylor, a carnival worker. They also learned that at the time of her disappearance and death, Barbara and George had an 8-month-old daughter. These 2 details alone shed light to 2 other major elements of her case. The green tarp Barbara's body was wrapped in, it was the same type of canvas commonly used in circus tents. The towel found with her remains, it wasn't just any towel, it was a cloth diaper, the kind often used for infants. Everything was beginning to fall into place. And when it came to a suspect, investigators had only one name in mind: George Earl Taylor, her husband. The biggest reason? George never reported his wife missing. Instead, he simply told Barbara's family she had left him for another man. Not only did he fail to search for her, but he was also known for his explosive temper. And the tarp Barbara was found in? It was easily accessible to George through his work at the carnival. Alas, while this theory is quite compelling, the question of who killed Barbara may never be fully answered, and the person responsible will never face justice. George Earl Taylor, the prime suspect, died of cancer in October 1987, more than a decade before Barbara was finally identified. And with him gone, so too was the chance for investigators to interrogate him and press for the truth. The case remains officially unsolved, but for Barbara's family, at least one mystery was finally put to rest. Her name was returned to her. Her body remains in Georgetown Cemetery, where her tombstone has been changed to add a few crucial details. Barbara Ann Bobby Hackman, September 12, 1943 to December 6, 1967. Loving mother, grandmother, and sister. And with that, the mystery of Tent Girl's identity was solved, thanks to the persistence of one Todd Matthews, whose determination led to the discovery of Barbara's identity, which had eluded investigators for close to 30 years. So, what did Todd Matthews do after such a groundbreaking achievement of being the one to solve the internet's first cold case mystery? Unsurprisingly, Todd continued assisting in the investigation of other missing person cases. He helped found the Doe Network, a nonprofit organization comprised of volunteer amateur cyber sleuths who work along with investigators to determine the identity of John and Jane Does, like Barbara Ann Hackman, and help families find missing loved ones. As a pioneer in cyber sleuthing, Todd also worked as a consultant for various film and TV projects, with one of his most notable clients being filmmaker Jerry Bruckheimer. Additionally, he served as the former director of case management and communications for NAMUS.gov, the national online database for missing and unidentified persons. On January 3, 2024, at the age of 53, Todd Matthews passed away at his home in Livingston, Tennessee. He leaves behind his beloved wife, Lori Ann Riddle Matthews, and his sons, Dylan and Devin Matthews, both of whom have families of their own, making Todd a grandfather of 2. While Todd may no longer be with us, the impact he made on the online detective community will live on, ensuring his legacy endures for generations to come. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel, as it really helps us to keep bringing more stories to you. Like this one about 2 women who killed a man in an airport for a YouTube video. They swear that it was all just a prank, but how could that be? Well, they had quite the story to go along with it. Click the video on your screen to watch now. 3 words. White female bones. Christina couldn't get them out of her head. As a genealogy student at Cleveland State University, Christina Skates was sat in the dimly lit library, hunched over stacks of old cemetery records, flipping through pages filled with the dead, when she came across an entry that stood out. White female bones. No name, no description, no past. Just an entry in a burial log, stripped of identity, with a number in place of a name. Woman 82483. She frowned. Something about it didn't sit right. She was used to coming across records with missing details, illegible handwriting, or dates that didn't quite match, but this wasn't a mistake. This was someone, a woman who had lived, breathed, and died, only to be reduced to a number in a forgotten file. She leaned back, exhaled. Maybe it was nothing. Probably just one of the countless unidentified cases that had slipped through the cracks over the years. But still, she couldn't let it go. She picked up her phone and dialed the cemetery. Maybe they could tell her something. Who woman 82483 was, where she came from, why no one had claimed her. But the answer she got was worse than she expected. Nothing. The cemetery had no information to give her past those 3 off-putting words on file. Since her burial in the unmarked mass grave, no one had come forward. No investigation had continued. The case had been left to collect dust, just like the records she was holding. And that was supposed to be the end of it. But for Christina Skates, it was only the beginning. Christina shared her findings on Reddit, expressing her frustration over the lack of progress. A call to the cemetery confirmed that no action had been taken since her interment. I have attempted to contact the city's detective, but have not had any response in months. Taking matters into her own hands, she dug deeper, looking through brittle newspaper clippings and grainy microfilm reels, tracing the mystery of woman 82483 back to its inception. 40 years prior, on February 5th, 1975, 3 teenage boys were hiking through Rocky River Reservation Park in Strongsville, Ohio, until they saw something that stopped them in their tracks. Down by the riverbank, half buried in the damp earth, something pale jut out from the mud. At first, it was just a shape, an odd one. They step closer. The shape doesn't move. They see more fragments, tangled in the roots and debris. It's a skeleton, and it's been here a while. Now you'd think this would be the moment they run straight to the nearest phone, but no. For reasons unknown, maybe shock or teenage logic, they don't report it right away. Hours pass. Maybe they tell their parents first. Maybe they sit with the knowledge, debating what to do, but eventually, the police are called. At first, officers aren't even sure what they're looking at. Could be an animal skeleton, could be something else. But after uncovering the skull, the answer becomes clear. It was human. And someone, somewhere, knows how it got there. Christina continued making calls, and not just one or two. She was relentless. First stop, the Strongsville Police Department, specifically the detective sergeant. No luck there. Next, she tried the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's office, reaching out to both the records department and administration. Surely someone had something. Nope, still nothing. She even left a voicemail for the Metro Park Rangers, who had initially handled the case back in the 70s. If anyone had first-hand knowledge of how this woman was discovered, it was them. She waited for a callback, but deep down, she had a feeling she'd be waiting a while. Then, she circled back to the cemetery itself. Maybe there was an old caretaker or dusty ledger hiding in some forgotten filing cabinet that could shed light on the burial. But then, finally, a breakthrough. She got her hands on the autopsy report, and it confirmed what she had suspected. There were signs of trauma, violence. This was a murder. Christina discovered that when forensic experts got their hands on the remains, they realized something disturbing. This wasn't a complete skeleton. Some bones were missing. The jaw was gone entirely, like it had been taken. And that was just the beginning. Dr. Charles Hirsch, the assistant county coroner, took over the examination. After careful analysis, he confirmed that the remains belonged to a young woman somewhere between 17 and 23 years old. She was petite, around 5'1", weighing roughly 100 to 110 pounds. And one more thing. She hadn't been there for decades. She had been murdered just a few months before those boys stumbled across her. Cause of death? Gunshot to the head. A single bullet through the skull. No name, no identification. Just a skeleton with missing pieces and a violent past, buried along the riverbank. Whoever did this made sure she had nothing on her that could tell authorities who she was. No wallet, no jewelry, no clothing that could lead back to a store, no personal belongings. As if someone had gone out of their way to erase her entirely. But no one just vanishes into thin air. Someone, somewhere, had to know who she was. Someone knew what happened to her. But as the investigation began and the news of the case spread, one name shot to the forefront. A name that had been making national headlines at the time. Patricia Hearst. Patricia Hearst wasn't just anyone. She was the granddaughter of publishing tycoon William Randolph Hearst, and in February 1974, she had been kidnapped from her apartment in Berkeley, California, by a radical group called the Symbionese Liberation Army. A media circus followed. Everyone was looking for her. But then things got strange. Instead of being a helpless victim, Hearst appeared to have joined her captors. There were reports of her helping rob a bank, and this is where it gets relevant to our story. There had been sightings of her nearby in Cleveland, Ohio. The country was obsessed with the Hearst case. It was all over the news. A missing young woman found in Ohio at just the right time? Investigators had to check it out. And when investigators looked at the skeleton's profile, height, weight, age, it all seemed to line up a little too well. But after obtaining the dental records of Patricia Hearst and comparing them to the skeleton, which had 5 dental fillings, it wasn't her. Patricia Hearst was still out there. This was someone else. And past that one failed theory, the authorities' search for answers didn't last long. Despite what was apparently their best efforts, investigators hit a dead end in identifying the remains found along the Rocky River. No missing person reports seemed to match, and according to them, no one came forward with information. And then, almost as quickly as the investigation had started, it stopped. A spokesman for the Cuyahoga County Coroner's Office admitted they were out of leads. No new evidence, just a skeleton with no name, no story, and no one fighting to find the truth. We're still trying, he said. We've gone about as far as possible with what we have now. And what they had, admittedly, wasn't much. Only 6 teeth remained. The body itself had been left exposed to the elements for months, badly decomposed near the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad tracks. Without more dental records or a missing persons report that matched, there was nothing more they could do. With no leads and no name, the case went cold. And then there was an issue of burial. In fact, based on the news articles that Christina uncovered, most of the coverage on the case at the time was more concerned with the bureaucracy surrounding the burial of the woman's remains rather than actually trying to determine her identity or who was responsible for her death. The question of who she was had already stumped investigators. But now, another debate took center stage. Who was going to pay the $100 burial cost? You'd think that'd be a drop in the bucket for local government, but no. Instead, it turned into a bureaucracy bureaucratic hot potato. Strongsville, where the remains were found, insisted it wasn't their responsibility. Cleveland shrugged it off. Cuyahoga County pointed fingers in both directions. The welfare department refused to take the case, saying they only handled burials for veterans. The city's vital statistics office claimed it was a county matter. The county's veteran affairs office said that, since the body was found in Strongsville, it was Strongsville's problem. But when Strongsville officials were asked about a supposed 1965 agreement stating municipalities were responsible for facilitating the burial of people with no money, nobody seemed to know whether it applied to unidentified bodies. Meanwhile, the woman's remains sat in limbo at the coroner's office, and without new information, there was nothing more they could do. In the end, it was decided she would be buried in Potter's Field Highland View Cemetery, the final resting place for those with no names, no history, and no family to claim them. White female bones, woman 82483. And that is where she spent the next 40 years, in limbo, waiting for a kind student to find her entry in the dusty archives and change her destiny. Christina updated the Reddit post with her findings and mapped out her next moves with precision, waiting, probably in vain, for a callback from the Metro Park Rangers, and to get this Jane Doe entered into Name US, the National Missing Persons Database, and reaching out to Berea PD, the first agency originally called to the scene. She also planned to contact the Western Reserve Medical Center, which had examined the skull, and check in with the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Office, just in case some long-forgotten record was still gathering dust in their archives. Other Redditors were quick to voice their thoughts and offer assistance where they could, with one commenter saying, "It is really heartbreaking that most of the coverage was not focused on trying to identify her or discover what happened, suicide, murder, etc., but rather on interbureaucratic bickering over who had to foot the bill to bury her. That just makes me sad." And another commenter saying, "Wow, that's an impressive amount of research you did. Do you mind if I cross-post this to Web Sleuth's Unidentified Forum?" Christina responded enthusiastically, "Please, just let me know when/if you do. Here you go. I credited you." Her case eventually caught the attention of users on Web Sleuths, a popular true crime forum where amateur investigators and online sleuths gather to analyze cold cases, share findings, and piece together missing details. Christina Skates had been digging deeper while sharing her findings on the Web Sleuths thread. She started by checking Cuyahoga County's list of unidentified remains, the official record of the nameless, but Strongsville Jane Doe wasn't there. According to the system, she didn't exist. She wrote on the platform, "I have contacted about everyone I can so far. I'm new at this, so keep suggestions rolling." That's when a new amateur detective entered the chat. Carl Kopelman, who would soon become a pivotal part of this investigation, wrote on the platform, "Incidentally, I just spoke with the Cuyahoga MedX office about this case yesterday. They had contacted me regarding the 1981 Euclid Bosco Tech John Doe, and while I had her on the phone, I asked about this case. She couldn't find anything in her records about this Jane Doe, and was totally unaware of her existence. But why? Why was there seemingly no record of this unidentified victim? A mistake? A cover-up? The answer was chillingly simple. Ange Fisher, from the Cuyahoga County MedX office, looked in her system and discovered that she was not included with the other UID cases because the word unidentified was misspelled. But they have all the info on this case, and she is going to send what she has to the Name Us and get a case file set up for this case. This entire time, a single spelling mistake had erased her from databases, preventing her case from being linked to missing persons reports. She wasn't just unidentified, she was invisible. For decades, her case had been buried under paperwork, clerical errors, and plain old neglect. But now, with the Strongsville Jane Doe being officially added to Name Us, the national database for missing and unidentified persons, things started moving fast. Next was the matter of how to reconstruct a sketch of the woman's likeness, which would be difficult seeing as all they had was a partial skeleton. During her research, however, Christina had managed to track down something critical, a photograph of the skull, but it wasn't much. She wrote, "I think we're screwed on facial reconstruction. The skeleton was missing quite a few bones due to scavenging of animals and possibly water current. Only 5 teeth and an unerupted number 16 wisdom tooth were present, post-mortem loss of the others. No mandible." Little did she know that the web sleuth who had discovered the spelling error, Carl Koppelman, just so happened to also be the perfect guy for the job. And if you're ever in need of a perfect lawyer for the job, Morgan & Morgan, this video's sponsor, has you covered. If you're ever seriously hurt, your injury could be worth millions. A Morgan & Morgan case in Florida ended in a settlement of $12 million, which is 34 times the highest insurance offer. And in Philadelphia, another case went home with 40 times the highest insurance offer at $26 million. And that was only within the last couple of months for victims involved in life-altering car crashes. They don't settle for lowball offers. Instead, if you become their client, they will fight to get you what you deserve. And you don't even have to pay them unless you win. So if you ever get seriously injured, your case could be worth millions. And you're only a few clicks away from potentially changing your life. It's so easy. You can start your claim now with Morgan & Morgan at forthepeople.com/brew, found in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen from your phone's camera. And thank you, Morgan & Morgan, for sponsoring today's video. As for Christina, she didn't need a legal team, but she did need Carl Kopelman, a master of his craft. Carl wasn't a detective. He didn't have a badge, an official title, or the authority to flash credentials at a crime scene. He wasn't the guy kicking down doors or grilling suspects under a flickering interrogation room light. But what he did have was something just as powerful, an obsession, the kind that kept him up at night, clicking through case files, cross-referencing databases, and chasing the truth long after most people would have moved on. This wasn't just a hobby for him. He was part of a new breed of investigator, the citizen detective, a growing community of researchers, genealogists, and internet sleuths who weren't content to sit on the sidelines while cold cases collected dust. They didn't need an office at the precinct or a government paycheck. Armed with forensic genealogy, digital archives, and relentless determination, they were doing what law enforcement hadn't, tracking down the missing, giving names to the nameless, and bringing long-forgotten cases back into the spotlight. So when Carl stumbled across Christina's post, something about woman 82483 stuck with him. Maybe it was the way her case had been swallowed whole by red tape, tangled in bureaucratic nonsense until it faded into obscurity. Or maybe it was the more unsettling reality that no one had ever come forward looking for her. No missing persons report that matched. No family desperate for answers. It was as if she had simply vanished from the world, unnoticed and unclaimed. And that didn't sit right with him. Carl had cracked cases before. He knew what it was like to chase a lead down an endless rabbit hole, to spend hours staring at grainy photographs and handwritten reports, searching for the one overlooked detail that could change everything. He had reunited families, put names to faces of the lost, and seen firsthand how a single piece of information could bring closure to mysteries left unsolved for decades. Woman 82483 deserved that chance. Carl Kopelman had already helped reconstruct the faces of several unidentified victims, one of the most haunting cases being a nameless girl everyone knew as Walker County Jane Doe. Walker County Jane Doe had been murdered, and for over 40 years, her killer had gone unpunished. It was November 1st, 1980, a quiet, uneventful morning in Huntsville, Texas. The kind of morning where nothing seems out of place, but on the side of Interstate 45, something was. A driver passing through spotted her first, a young girl, face down in a ditch, motionless. Upon closer inspection, she had been beaten, strangled, and discarded like she was nothing. Whoever had done this to her hadn't even tried to hide her. No shallow grave, no effort to cover their tracks. Just left there as if she was meant to be found. And yet for decades, no one could figure out who she was. She became Walker County Jane Doe, another nameless girl in the morgue, another cold case gathering dust in police files. She was young, no older than 16. Too young for this. She wore a yellow long-sleeve shirt with a horse design, a pair of flared jeans, and high-heeled sandals. Not the kind of clothing you'd expect from someone living on the streets for long. She had no purse, no wallet, no ID. But there was one chilling detail that made this case different. The night before she was found, she had been seen alive. Witnesses saw her at a truck stop diner near Huntsville. She wasn't just some drifter passing through, though. She had a purpose. She walked inside and asked for directions to the local county jail. Why? She said she was looking for someone, but she never said who. When employees pressed her for more details, she just brushed them off. "I'll be fine," she told them, and then she left. Hours later, she was dead. For years, police tried to identify her. They followed leads. They checked missing persons reports. Nothing. No family stepped forward. No friends came looking. She had vanished from somewhere, but no one seemed to know where that was. By 2019, her case had faded into obscurity. Advances in forensic science had helped solve other cases, but Walker County Jane Doe was still just that, a Jane Doe. And that's when Carl Kopelman entered the picture. In 2019, he took on Walker County Jane Doe's case. Using post-mortem photos, forensic data, and old reconstructions, he worked meticulously to recreate her likeness. Not just as a forensic tool, he was bringing her back to life. His sketch was shared across the internet, web sleuths, Reddit, cold case forums, and people saw her. They talked about her. She was no longer forgotten. Then, in 2020, investigators decided to take one last shot. They turned to forensic genealogy, the game changer in modern cold cases. Using a DNA sample taken from Walker County Jane Doe, they uploaded her profile to GED Match, a public database where people upload their raw DNA data, usually from consumer testing kits like 23andMe or Ancestry DNA, to find relatives and trace their family history. However, unlike commercial DNA sites that keep their data locked for privacy reasons, GED Match is open source. That means law enforcement can use it too, and they have, big time. When police have an unknown suspect's DNA, say from a cold case, they can create a profile and upload it to GED Match. If the suspect's DNA has any distant relatives in the database, the system finds those genetic connections. Investigators then use good old-fashioned genealogy techniques, family trees, historical records, birth certificates, to narrow down possible suspects. That's exactly how the Golden State Killer was caught in 2018. His DNA sat in evidence for decades, but once it was uploaded to GED Match, investigators found distant cousins. From there, it was just a matter of tracing family lines, eliminating suspects, and boom, Joseph DeAngelo was in cuffs. In the next case of the Walker County Jane Doe, once her DNA was uploaded to GED Match, genealogists worked backwards, tracing her family tree using her DNA, following the fragments of history that led to her existence. And in November 2021, after 41 years, they found her. Her name was Sherry Ann Jarvis. She had been just 14 years old, even younger than originally believed, a runaway from Minnesota, searching for something better, only to meet the worst possible fate. With Carl's help, authorities ultimately identified her, and Walker County Jane Doe finally had a name. But not every case finds resolution so easily. Strongsville Jane Doe was still waiting. But thanks to Carl Koppelman, the case took an interesting turn. Carl did what he did best. He analyzed the skull's structure, studied past reconstructions, and carefully crafted a new sketch of what Strongsville Jane Doe might have looked like. Now, the long-lost woman had a face. It was a small step, but an important one, giving a face to a name that had been missing for decades. That's when Carl Koppelman came across something new, a fresh listing for a missing woman from Akron, Ohio, dating back to 1974. This newly listed missing woman from late 1974 looks like a very good possible Strongsville Jane. Linda Pagano. Age is right, location is good, time frame is good, her listed height is a little short. Another member on the platform responded saying, "Excellent find, Carl. Should this turn out to be her, I will have to say that your reconstruction of the missing part of the skull is spot on." Carl then reached out to authorities to share this promising lead. Just talked to Ange Fisher of the Cuyahoga MedX office. Looks like they are already onto this possible match and are working on getting dental x-rays of her. She says that Linda had extensive dental work, so that is a big plus. All 5 remaining teeth had fillings. Akron police had reached out to Cuyahoga County. Dental records were the first step. Before going through the long, expensive process of DNA testing, authorities wanted to see if there were any obvious mismatches. There weren't. That only meant one thing. It was time to exhume the body. Now, that sounds simple. Dig up the remains, take a sample, run the test, except it wasn't that easy. See, Strongsville Jane Doe had been buried in the Potter's Field Cemetery for the unclaimed, the unknown, and the forgotten. No headstones, no grave markers, just a field of unmarked graves. And somewhere beneath it, she had been waiting for 44 years. Law enforcement couldn't just start digging up dead bodies at random. They needed precision. That's where the University of Akron stepped in. Using magnetic surveying, researchers mapped the cemetery, pinpointing the likely location of the body. Even then, it took multiple attempts. When they finally got the right set of remains, bone samples were taken for DNA analysis. At the same time, family of Linda Pagano, the potential match, provided mouth swabs to compare their mitochondrial DNA. The samples were sent to the University of North Texas, one of the leading forensic DNA labs in the country. Then, the waiting began. Months passed. Lab techs ran the tests, double-checking results, and made sure there was no room for doubt. Then, on June 29, 2018, 44 years after disappearance, the confirmation finally came through. Woman 82483 was Linda Pagano. Just got word from Linda Pagano's sister that Strongsville Jane Doe is in fact Linda Pagano. Although the authorities were on to the possible match before I called it in, I am flagging the thread as a WS match because, if not for the amazing sleuthing work by Christina Skates, this case would still be buried deep in the police and coroner's office archives. It was only because Christina decided to investigate a Jane Doe grave that was not listed anywhere, the case was listed in Name Us, and consequently was noticed by Akron PD. Congratulations, Christina, and great work. But who was this Linda Pagano, and was her killer still out there? August 31st, 1974. It should have been just any other summer night. The kind of night where the air still holds onto the warmth of the day, where teenagers pile into their cars with the radio turned up too loud, chasing one last bit of freedom before fall sets in. And for Linda, that's exactly how the night started. Linda was 17, smart, responsible, not the type to just up and vanish. She had a steady job at A&W, a sleek new Mustang, and a future she was building one careful step at a time. She went to attend a concert with her boyfriend that night, and she was never seen again. At least, that was the official story. And for a long time, that's all there was. No follow-up investigation, no police search, no evidence collection, just a convenient, sweeping assumption. Linda had run away, and in 1974, that was enough. Case closed. Never mind that Linda wasn't the type to run. Never mind that she left behind her brand new Mustang, her job, her entire life. Never mind that she had no history of running away, or any reason to vanish into thin air. None of that mattered, because the only person who ever claimed to see her leave was her stepfather, and apparently his word was enough. Linda had returned home from the concert in the early morning hours, stepping into the small Akron, Ohio apartment she shared with her stepfather, Byron Claflin, and that's where things took a dark turn. Now, Byron wasn't exactly known for his patience. He had a reputation for being hot-tempered, prone to outbursts, the kind of man who could turn a minor disagreement into a full-blown shouting match. That night, he claimed they argued. He claimed that Linda had come home too late. He claimed he was fed up. And so, according to him, and he's the only one who can tell this part of the story, he did something unthinkable. He kicked her out. Just like that. No warning, no second chances. A teenage girl kicked out onto the streets in the middle of the night with nowhere to go. He didn't give her time to pack a bag. She didn't take extra clothes, money, or anything useful. And the strangest part? She left behind her Mustang, the car she loved. The car that represented her freedom. And then, nothing. No one saw Linda leave. No one reported running into her on the street. No friends got a call from her. No one spotted her trying to hitch a ride. It was as if she had walked out that door and simply ceased to exist. The police, at first, leaned on the usual explanations. Maybe she ran away. Maybe she was lying low. Maybe she'd show up in a few days, embarrassed about the whole ordeal. But those explanations didn't sit right. Linda wasn't the kind of girl who just disappeared. The rest of Linda's family didn't buy it. Not for a second. But it didn't matter what they believed. The police had already made up their minds, and once a case got labeled as a runaway, it was as good as dead. No search teams, no press conferences, no urgency, just a name added to a list and a file cabinet door slammed shut. So, her family did what law enforcement wouldn't. They made their own missing person flyers and plastered them everywhere. They went door to door, asking questions no one else was asking. They reached out to anyone who might have seen something, anything. And for months, nothing. No leads, no sightings, just a seemingly endless silence. Then, February 1975, a break. That winter, a news report surfaced. An unidentified body had been found in Strongsville, Ohio, about 30 miles from where Linda had last been seen. The remains belonged to a young woman. No name, no ID, skeletonized, unclaimed, and the details were vague, but it was enough to catch the attention of Mike Pagano, Linda's older brother. He called the police. He told them about his sister, her name, her height, how long she'd been missing. The distance between Akron and Strongsville wasn't exactly cross-country. It was reasonable, likely even, that this could be Linda. And the response? Flat-out dismissal. According to Mike, the woman on the other end of the line just said that the unidentified woman was a little older and probably a little taller. Didn't ask follow-up questions. Didn't even compare dental records. Just a casual, indifferent, nope, not your sister. And that was it. Linda Pagano was gone. And for decades, no one knew where or why. The bones that Mike suspected to be his sister's remained unidentified, labeled as Woman 82483, and Linda's case would remain in limbo. And her family? They were left chasing her ghost, searching for a girl who had already been found, just apparently not by the right people. But without law enforcement on their side, what more could they do? The years passed, people moved on, and Linda's story faded into the background. becoming just another missing person case authorities had chosen to forget. 44 years later, when the DNA of the bones found in Strongsville came back as a match, for Linda's family, the revelation was both closure and confirmation of what they had suspected all along. Mike Pagano, her older brother, had tried to get authorities to compare records decades earlier, only to be dismissed. If they had listened, perhaps the family wouldn't have spent years searching for answers that they could have had from the start. Upon hearing they had finally found her remains, Mike says, "I thought I was in a dream. I thought I'd never hear this. I thought this day would never come. I thought I would die wondering." The solving of the mystery came too late for Linda's mother, who had spent much of her life hoping for a resolution, and she sadly passed away in 2012 without knowing what happened to her daughter. With the identification confirmed, Linda was finally laid to rest under her own name. In September 2018, more than 4 decades after she was murdered, her family held a memorial service in her honor. Her remains were buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Akron, Ohio, the city where she had lived, the place where she should have grown old. It wasn't the homecoming her loved ones had hoped for, but it was something, a proper burial, a headstone bearing her real name, a chance for her family to say goodbye, even if it came far too late. But the question that lingers, the one that's been hanging over this case for decades, is who killed Linda Pagano? And here's where things get frustrating. If investigators had done their jobs back in 1975, if they had taken Mike Pagano's calls seriously, compared records, and identified Linda's remains when they were first discovered, maybe, just maybe, there could have been a proper investigation. Maybe there would have been enough time to figure out who was responsible. Christina Skates herself says, "Only one thing I can think about right now, and it's how fast we solved this case in comparison to when it was discovered. Instead, decades passed, evidence was lost, witnesses got older, memories faded, and the one person who was always at the center of suspicion died before anyone could ask him a single question." Byron Claflin, Linda's stepfather, was the last person to see her alive. His story was sketchy from the start and sounds like a tough sell. The stepfather theory is the most logical one, but still a theory nevertheless. Claflin had a history of being volatile, and throwing a teenage girl out of the house, alone and defenseless, was already a reckless move at best. As for some other theories, some have speculated that maybe she did leave the apartment and was picked up by the wrong person. Maybe she was abducted. Maybe she was killed by a stranger. But there's no evidence to support that. Not after all these years. And now, we'll probably never get the full truth. Claflin died in 1990. If Linda had been identified earlier, he could have been questioned, but that chance is long gone. The best we can hope for now is that someone, somewhere, knows something. A friend, a relative, anyone who might be able to shed light on what really happened that night in 1974. Because, officially, this case remains unsolved. And unless something new comes to light, it might stay that way forever. At the end of the day, forgotten cases only stay forgotten if no one keeps asking questions. Names matter, identities matter, and sometimes the right person looking in the right place can change everything. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel, as it really helps us to keep bringing more stories to you. Like this one about 2 women who killed a man in an airport for a YouTube video. They swear that it was all just a prank, but how could that be? Well, they had quite the story to go along with it. Click the video on your screen to watch now.
The challenge for our search teams were what we're going to have to deal with on the challenge. The challenge for our search teams were what we're going to have to deal with on the recovery of body parts.
This case takes place in the United Kingdom on the 21st of April, 2015. Tracy Woodford was born on the 13th of February 1968 and grew up in Wales. She was described as a gentle and kind soul, and in her adult years, Tracy remained close to her family, living with her mother Linda and her brother Sean. It is said that she lived a rather simple life and was happy to just spend time with her family and close friends. The day of April 21st, 2015 began like any other, but it would be the last time that 47-year-old Tracy would ever be seen alive again. Her brother Sean recalls the details of that day. They had a cup of tea in the kitchen, where Tracy told her brother that she was going to be buying a ring in the town centre. So, on this day, she ventured into Pontypridd town centre and purchased the ring. Following this, she decided to stop off at a couple of pubs and bars. Whilst there is nothing particularly strange about someone having a few drinks, it was unusual for Tracy, who rarely drank and had a low tolerance for alcohol. She wandered into various pubs and bars that afternoon, but at one point, she was refused alcohol for seeming to be too unsteady on her feet. Eventually, at around 7:45 p.m, Tracy wandered into the Skinny Dog pub, a place where locals were known to have gathered. It is in this pub where she encountered a 50-year-old man named Christopher May. Tracy's presence at the Skinny Dog was noted by those around her, as she appeared to be nervous and fragile. Despite this, she found herself conversing with Christopher May and his group of friends. It is likely that Tracy's nervous disposition was of keen interest to Christopher, who saw a dark and twisted opportunity. Christopher was described as a joker and a nice guy by his friends, and the Skinny Dog was his usual drinking spot. As the evening at the pub progressed, Tracy's demeanour shifted. She perked up and began to feel comfortable with Christopher and his friends. Witnesses would later recall seeing the two flirting with one another, with Christopher at one point offering to buy her drinks if she went home with him, although Tracy insisted that she was not that kind of woman. But as the night went on, and as the clock neared 11:30 p.m, CCTV cameras would capture Tracy walking alongside Christopher, heading towards his flat. 3 hours following Tracy's last appearance on CCTV, neighbours residing beneath Christopher's flat were awakened by a sharp thud. The neighbours assumed that Christopher was returning home after a night drinking like he would usually do, and that he was drunk and had fallen over. Because of this, they paid little attention. That night, Tracy didn't make it home, and her family became deeply worried. The following day, Christopher appeared at his workplace. He worked at a restaurant, and members of staff at this restaurant noticed prominent scratches on his face. The manager asked what had happened to him, and Christopher recounted a story of an accident involving a pole that he purchased from a hardware store. This explanation was accepted without suspicion at the time, as there was no reason to suspect anything sinister. A neighbour of Christopher had also seen him walking around carrying something. His appearance made an impression on her, as he appeared to be extremely fatigued. She noted that he seemed drained of life. With still no word from Tracy, her family began to take action. Tracy's mother had called around to see if anyone had seen her daughter. She called her other daughter Sharon to see if Tracy had spent the night with her, but Sharon hadn't seen her either. They had called and messaged Tracy a number of times, but there was no response. This behaviour was completely out of the ordinary, so they decided to involve the police. As the investigation began, the pieces began to fit together rather quickly. The police checked out the pubs in Pontypridd and were able to trace the final moments of Tracy's movements. They heard from many of the locals that Tracy had last been seen flirting with Christopher, and that the two had left the pub together. On the 24th of April, just days after her initial disappearance, Sergeant Stuart Williams and Constable Craig Gardner knocked on Christopher's door. Initially met with reluctance, they persisted and were finally granted access inside. The first thing that struck the officers was a foul smell. One of the officers would later say that he could smell what he believed to be rotten meat and cat urine. Inside the flat, Christopher appeared apprehensive. He recounted the events of that night, telling the police that he had met Tracy and that they did leave the pub together, but he claimed that he had made an inappropriate offer to Tracy and that she walked away after feeling insulted. Christopher then said that he returned home that night alone and had not seen or heard from her since. Not fully believing the story, the police wanted to probe a little further. Officers requested to search his flat, and Christopher agreed. They walked further inside Christopher's home, where the smell became even more apparent. They entered the bathroom of the home and pulled back the shower curtain. and behind the shower curtain were Tracy's dismembered arms and legs. The South Wales Police Forensics Investigation Team were called to the flat, whilst Christopher was taken into custody and questioned. Inside the flat were a chilling array of tools. They found that Christopher had used a handsaw, kitchen knife, and scissors to dismember her body. The police found an Adidas rucksack containing the upper torso of Tracy, and a handbag containing the partial remains of a thumb and fingers that matched the arm discovered in the shower, although they couldn't find Tracy's head. News of the unfolding horror spread like wildfire through the community as a dense police presence covered the area and media outlets gathered. During questioning, Christopher told the police that he had hidden some of her remains in a storm drain. On the 25th of April, the police went to this location. Meters inside this dark tunnel, they made a grim discovery. The tunnel was incredibly dark. On a ledge, a meter or so from the bottom of the chamber, officers could see that there was something in a red bag. The officer then turned his head to the right and saw a human head lying on its side and was covered in bruises and slash marks, and inside the red bag were more of Tracy's remains. This means that Christopher had removed Tracy's head, placed her inside a rucksack, left the house, and walked around in public with it on his back before placing the head in the storm drain. To think about him walking around in public with a severed head is incredibly chilling. The trial would begin later into 2015. PC Craig Gardner broke down while giving evidence about the moment he found Tracy's remains in the shower. He said, "I thought my eyes were deceiving me, and that I was watching some sort of horror movie." A pathologist who examined Tracy's body gave evidence. He said the dismemberment had been carried out by someone with experience with knives or of cutting up human bodies or animals. Christopher had previously been employed as a butcher, and he knew how to use a knife, how to remove meat from ribs, legs and shoulders, and was good at boning. The prosecution said, "It seems that his expertise in a butcher's shop has been put to use on a human body." The defense argued that Tracy was killed in a fit of rage after Christopher caught her going through his wallet. Christopher insisted that the killing was in self-defense and that he lost control during the row and strangled her to death. He also claimed that as he sobered up, he was physically sick several times, disgusted at what he had done to Tracy. He described that everything felt unreal as he transferred body parts from his flat over the following days into the water drain. Although it seemed that Christopher was not telling the whole truth, from the evidence collected, it seemed that this was no accident. His laptop revealed that on the night of Tracy's death, he had spent hours watching adult content after killing her, suggesting that there was some disturbing sexual motive for the heinous crime. And not only that, investigators found traces of Christopher's DNA on Tracy's body. The prosecution said that it's extremely likely, if not certain, that he used her body for his own gratification when she was dead. The prosecution argued that the killing of Tracy was a deliberate murder, and that Christopher played out his depraved and disturbing fantasies on an innocent and trusting woman. What is incredibly disturbing is that most of Tracy's internal organs have not been found, although some of them were found to be blocking Christopher's toilet as he attempted to flush some of them away. On the 19th of November 2015, following a 2-week trial, Christopher May was found guilty of Tracy Woodford's murder. He was given a life sentence with a minimum term of 28 years. It's reported that Christopher sat expressionless as the jury delivered the verdict. In the aftermath of the harrowing events that unfolded, the weight of the tragedy settled heavily on both the Woodford family and the entire community. The life of Tracy had been brutally cut short in the most brutal of ways. Her family have said that they are heartbroken and struggle to cope with their loss. Her mother Linda said, "It feels like we're living in a nightmare. He has torn my family apart. He has destroyed us totally." And Tracy's brother Sean has said, "I'm now angry every day and I struggle to sleep most nights." This case takes place in the USA and spans over a number of years. On a cold November day in 1957, the police in the small town of Plainville, Wisconsin, made a discovery so vile that it would inspire horror movies for generations. This is the true story of Ed Gein. Edward Theodore Gein was born on the 27th of August 1906. He was the second of two boys, born to George and Augusta Gein. When Ed was about 8 years old in 1914, the Gein family moved to a 155-acre farm outside of Plainfield, a remote rural area in central Wisconsin. Ed's father George was a volatile alcoholic who struggled to even hold down a job. He often left the child rearing to Augusta, and when he did interact with the boys, it was with his fists. George would beat Ed and his older brother Henry, sometimes striking Ed in the head so hard that his ears would ring. By contrast, Ed's mother Augusta was the dominant force in the household. She was extremely religious and fanatically strict. She would often preach to the boys that the world was full of immoral and sinful people. In Augusta's view, all women, except herself, were fallen and impure. In her eyes, they were naturally promiscuous and instruments of the devil. She told her sons that sex and temptation lurked everywhere, and she forbade them from having girlfriends or even friends in town. Augusta even predicted that God would punish the world for its sins. She told the boys that modern women's fashion like short skirts and makeup were signs of impending doom. Despite this, Ed idolized his mother. He loved and feared her to an extreme degree. From a young age, Ed was described as shy, socially awkward, and utterly devoted to his mother. He rarely even left the farm, except to attend school, where classmates later recalled him as an odd boy who would sometimes laugh to himself as if he was hearing voices. At home, Augusta kept Ed and Henry busy with chores and strict discipline. She discouraged any outside friendships. If Ed tried to make friends, Augusta would punish him severely. She wouldn't physically harm him, but she would scream in his face that he was going to hell, something that he likely feared. As a result, Ed grew up essentially friendless and sheltered, with Augusta as the center of his world. Psychologists later suggested that her overbearing, puritanical parenting might have led Ed to develop an unhealthy obsession with her. Now, there is one story from Ed's childhood that gets mentioned in some sources. According to some, Ed snuck into the farm slaughterhouse, and there he quietly watched as his mother slaughtered a pig. As the story goes, upon seeing the pig being killed, Ed had his first orgasm. In the 1930s, as an adult, Ed mostly worked as a farmhand and a handyman. He and his brother picked up the odd jobs around town to help make ends meet after their father's drinking finally caught up with him. In April of 1940, George Gein died of heart failure at 66. Ed was 34. With George gone, Augusta's hold on her sons only tightened. However, Henry voiced concerns about Ed's attachment to their mother. He found it unhealthy how he worshipped her and obeyed her every word. On the 16th of May 1944, Ed and Henry were burning vegetation on their farm, when all of a sudden, it got completely out of control. According to Ed, the two got separated in the smoke. When night fell and Henry still hadn't returned, Ed went to the authorities to report his brother missing. Now, strangely, Ed led searchers straight to Henry's body, which was found lying face down on a scorched patch of land. Though Henry had some minor burns, they weren't severe enough to cause his death. The coroner listed the cause of death as asphyxiation due to smoke inhalation, possibly combined with heart failure, and so officials ruled it as an accident. However, some people who were present later noted that Henry had some mysterious marks on his head, details that fueled later suspicion that Ed may have killed his own brother. Henry's death was officially recorded as a tragic accident, but forever shrouded in doubt. Henry's mysterious death deeply affected Augusta. Shortly afterwards, she suffered a paralyzing stroke, rendering her dependent on Ed's care. For about a year, he became her carer. Augusta briefly recovered enough that Ed could take her out of the house on one occasion. He later recounted an outing in 1945 to buy straw from a neighbour, during which Augusta witnessed an upsetting scene. The neighbour brutally beat a dog to death in front of them, while a woman from the neighbour's house came outside and yelled for him to stop. Augusta was horrified, but not for the reasons you might think. She was horrified not by the animal cruelty, but by the presence of the woman. She angrily called this woman a harlot, as this woman was living with a man that she wasn't married to. Soon after this, she had a second stroke, and her health went into rapid decline. On the 29th of December 1945, Augusta Gein died at the age of 67. Ed was completely devastated by his mother's death. The 39-year-old had never known true independence. In the big farmhouse, he now lived utterly alone. Following her death, in a bizarre act of devotion, Ed boarded up Augusta's bedroom and the other room she used in the house. He moved into a small room next to the kitchen and allowed the rest of the farmhouse to decay, but his mother's room stayed pristinely preserved. In the years after his mother's death, Ed's behaviour grew increasingly strange. He would later say that a force built up inside of him. He spent his time reading. He became obsessed with books about death, anatomy, and Nazi atrocities. He was particularly fascinated by stories of cannibals and human experiments. One real-life figure who caught Ed's interest was Isla Koch, who, as rumour had it, collected the skin of concentration camp inmates to make lampshades. Now, this did turn out to be a myth. However, Ed was greatly inspired. During this time, neighbours still saw Ed as odd, but mostly harmless. He continued to do handyman work for people in the neighbourhood, and he was even known to babysit local children. However, he was far from harmless. One local teenager who knew Ed later recalled that Ed showed him some shrunken heads that he kept at the farmhouse. Ed told this teenager that they were souvenirs sent to him by a cousin in the Philippines who fought in World War II, but in reality, Ed was indulging in some gruesome practices in secret. After his mother's death, he had been grave robbing. At night, Ed would creep into local cemeteries to exhume recently buried women whom he thought looked like his mother, and these shrunken heads belonged to victims that he had grave robbed. Ed subscribed to the local newspaper, and he closely followed the obituaries, looking for the deaths of middle-aged women. When a fresh grave of a suitable candidate appeared, Ed would wait until night-time and then dig the body up. Ed would later claim that when he did this, he was in some kind of detached state, like something had taken over him. In some instances, Ed claimed that he snapped out of whatever trance he was in during the middle of grave robbing, got scared, and ran away. But on at least 9 occasions, he followed through and stole bodies from coffins. In Ed's mind, he was not desecrating the dead. He was trying to resurrect or become his mother. He later admitted that he wanted a sex change operation and also tried to create a woman suit made of real human skin so he could be his mother. Using real tanned human skin, Ed fashioned items ranging from clothing to furniture. He later denied having any intercourse with the bodies, explaining that they smelled too bad. But short of that, he mutilated corpses in almost every other way imaginable. For roughly a whole decade from 1947 to 1957, Ed Gein's farmhouse became a literal house of horrors. Human bones were littered around his property. He made a trash can wastebasket fashioned from human flesh, chairs made of human skin, sawed-off skull tops used as bowls and cups, clothing made from body parts, a belt made of female nipples. He even made a lampshade out of a human face. These are but a few things that were later found. But then, he moved on from grave robbing and on to murder. Ed Gein's first victim was Mary Hogan, a 51-year-old tavern owner in Plainfield. Mary was a divorced, independent woman who had moved to Wisconsin from Illinois around 1949. She ran a small tavern on the outskirts of town, but her tavern wasn't just open to anyone. She was a cautious woman, and she only served regular customers that she knew, and she kept a shotgun behind the bar for extra protection. But on the 8th of December, 1954, Mary Hogan vanished from her tavern. That afternoon, a neighbour entered Mary's tavern and found bloodstains on the floor and an empty cash register. Mary was nowhere to be seen. A search turned up a .32 caliber cartridge on the floor, suggesting that she might have been shot. But there was no body. The disappearance of Mary Hogan remained a mystery for years. Ed was actually an early suspect, due to him making a rather strange comment. After Mary went missing, he said, "She isn't missing, she's down at the farm right now." No one took him seriously. They assumed that he was just making some kind of inappropriate, morbid joke. However, he was telling the truth, and he would strike again. Ed's second victim was a 58-year-old widow named Bernice Warden. Bernice was a lifelong resident of Plainfield, and she owned a hardware store. By all accounts, she was a well-respected and loved woman in the community, and a mother of 2 grown children, a son, Deputy Sheriff Frank Warden, and a daughter. Ed Gein was familiar to Bernice. He was a customer who occasionally bought things from her store. On the 16th of November 1957, at around 5 p.m, Deputy Frank Warden stopped by to check on his mother and the store, but inside he found an alarming scene. The cash register was open and overturned, and there was blood on the floor, and most terrifying of all, his mother, Bernice, was gone. Of course, Frank immediately suspected foul play, and one name leapt to his mind. Frank recalled that Ed had been in the store the previous evening and said he'd return in the morning for antifreeze for his truck. Sure enough, in the empty store, Frank found that receipt for the gallon of antifreeze written in his mother's handwriting, and the receipt was made out to Ed Gein. With growing dread, Frank alerted his fellow officers that Ed Gein might be responsible in his mother's disappearance. That very same evening, police quickly located and arrested Ed at a grocery store. He was taken into custody without incident. Meanwhile, officers then converged on the Gein farmhouse, hoping to find Bernice. But what they found would leave them traumatized for life. Inside the woodshed, they discovered Bernice's body hanging upside down from a ceiling beam. She had been decapitated and, quote, dressed out like a deer. Her carcass had been slit open, and she had been gutted. She had been shot with a .22 caliber rifle, and her body was totally mutilated. But the horror in the woodshed was only the beginning. Upon searching Ed's house, authorities discovered the human remains and creations that he had made. Bernice's severed head was found in a burlap sack, and her hat was discovered in a plastic bag near the stove. Mary Hogan's skull and face mask were also found, confirming her fate. In total, the remains of at least 2 murdered women and parts from countless exhumed corpses littered the property. They found the human skin-covered chairs, a corset made from a female torso, face masks made from the skin of human heads, 9 human vulvas, gloves made from human skin, among many, many other horrors. The police couldn't even comprehend what they were seeing. As you can imagine, word of the Plainfield House of Horrors spread rapidly, and soon reporters descended upon the little town. It was now the epicenter of what is described as the most gruesome crime scene in American history. In custody, Ed quickly confessed, though he spoke in a detached, matter-of-fact manner. He admitted to killing Bernice Warden, although he gave somewhat of an evasive account of the circumstances. In one psychiatric interview, Ed claimed that he hadn't intended to kill her. He said he was examining a rifle on a store shelf when it accidentally fired, hitting Bernice before he knew what he was doing. Ed then dragged her body to his truck and brought it home for his usual butchering ritual. He also eventually admitted to the 1954 murder of Mary Hogan, after initially denying any memory of it. With those 2 murders accounted for, the police wanted to know if Ed was behind other disappearances or unsolved cases. Ed was a suspect in a few cold cases. For example, the disappearance of Georgia Weckler in 1947, along with 15-year-old Evelyn Hartley in 1953. He was also suspected of being involved in other cases. However, lie detector tests and a lack of any evidence eventually cleared him of any involvement. It appeared to investigators that Ed's violence was mostly focused on adult women who reminded him of his mother. He told investigators how he studied obituary notices and chose freshly buried women to dig up. He told the police that he would sometimes come out of his strange trances, surrounded by body parts, and would think to himself, "What am I doing? This is wrong." But yet, he continued. Ed also corroborated the motive behind this. He was trying to make a surrogate for his mother. He said he robbed these graves and killed these women because he wanted to recreate or replace his mother. Psychologists interpreted this as a delusional attempt to resurrect his mother, or in his own words, get another mother. He wanted to build a woman suit, a full body outfit made of human skin, so he could literally wear it and become a woman. He was subsequently diagnosed with schizophrenia and severe psychosis. They believed that Ed had been in a dysfunctional state of mind for many, many years, perhaps intensified by extreme loneliness after his own mother's death. One forensic psychologist noted that Ed experienced auditory hallucinations. People who knew Ed often recalled his odd habit of laughing to himself, as if hearing an unseen voice. Ed himself described feeling compelled by forces beyond his control. He told doctors that after his mother's death, he would hear voices telling him to get another mother, or do things to fill the void. During questioning, an officer by the name of Art Sly became enraged as he was investigating the case. On one occasion, he completely lost his cool with Ed. Overwhelmed by the horror that he had seen, Sly slammed Ed's head into a brick wall during an interrogation out of pure rage. But this violence against Ed later complicated the legal case, as Ed's initial confession was ruled inadmissible because it was obtained under duress. But by then, Ed had freely repeated much of his story to other investigators. There was never much doubt about his guilt. The real question was Ed Gein's sanity, and whether or not he would be able to stand trial. And then, after Ed's arrest, his neighbour, 50-year-old Adeline Watkins, spoke with reporters. She told them that she had been in a 20-year romantic relationship with him, claiming that on one occasion he even proposed. She described how they would go to the movies and get milkshakes, and how they bonded over their love of books. Adeline claimed that they often spoke about true crime, but she claimed that Ed never spoke about his own horrific crimes. She recalled, "We discussed every murder we ever heard about. Eddie told me how the murderer did wrong and what mistakes they had made." And here's the strange part. She even called Ed a good, sweet, kind man. Her mother even attested that Ed was always polite and had her daughter home by 10 p.m. Although, after revealing this, she soon went back on some of her claims. As the media descended upon her further, she claimed that she exaggerated and that they were not in a 20-year romance, stating that Ed was merely just a friend. It was found that she was never involved in his criminal activities, although she stood by what she said about him being a good man. Ed was soon charged with first-degree murder along with a string of other offences. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Indeed, within days, doctors found him mentally unfit for trial. Ed was diagnosed as a schizophrenic and declared legally insane. Ed never consumed or was intimate with the body parts, though some tried to claim otherwise. Ed was later sent to a maximum security institution. There he would remain for the next decade, undergoing treatment and evaluation. For years, Ed Gein lived quietly in the mental hospital. By most accounts, he was a model patient, polite, unassuming, and even helpful around the facility. In 1968, after 11 years, doctors determined that Ed's condition had stabilized enough that he was competent enough to stand trial. The trial began in November of 1968. Given Ed's infamy, his defense team successfully requested a trial without jury to avoid any bias. The trial lasted 1 week. Psychiatrists testified on both sides. One doctor recounted how Ed claimed the shooting of Warden was accidental and that the gun went off in his hands whilst he was looking at it in the store. They stated that Ed wasn't even sure if he had consciously aimed at Bernice. But then another doctor for the prosecution explained the lengths that Ed went to into butchering her body and hiding it, suggesting that he knew right from wrong. In November of 1968, the judge delivered his verdict. Ed Gein was found guilty of first-degree murder. However, in a separate phase to determine his sanity, the judge concluded that Gein was not guilty by reason of insanity. The outcome was that Ed would not go to prison, but would instead spend the rest of his life confined in a secure mental hospital. Some believed that this was far too lenient. Many thought that he deserved death. He destroyed the lives of many, and left a lasting trauma on more. Some believe that Ed killed as many as 9 people, but we know for sure that he killed 2. Ed lived out the rest of his days in the mental health system, reportedly in relative tranquility. By all accounts, he was a mild, even likable inmate who caused little trouble. He even participated in some occupational therapy. He liked to spend his time painting and stone polishing. In March of 1958, his farmhouse was auctioned off, but mysteriously, it was later burned to the ground. The blaze had fully engulfed the home. The official cause of the fire was never determined, though arson was strongly suspected. When Ed was told about the fire and that his family home was destroyed, he simply shrugged and said, "Just as well." On the 26th of July 1984, Ed Gein passed away from respiratory failure due to lung cancer at the age of 77. In death, he returned to Plainfield. He was buried in the cemetery in the family plot next to his mother and his brother Henry. Over the years, morbid souvenir seekers kept chipping pieces off his tombstone until the entire stone was stolen in the year 2000. Today, Ed Gein lies in an unmarked grave in Plainfield, the town where he committed the most heinous of crimes.
Every town has a dark side. In 1977, a nurse was sitting in a community hall, listening to a man preach about the end of the world coming. Now, she was depressed and, like a lot of people, feeling pretty lost in life. And this man, who was charismatic to the max, walked up to her after his speech was done, looked directly into her eyes and told her that he knew how to help ease her pain for good. All she had to do was quit her job, leave her family, and follow him out into the Canadian wilderness. So she did, and so did a whole bunch of other people. And over the course of the next decade, what would develop from there was one of the most depraved and vicious cults the world has ever seen, the details of which are hard to even put into words. Now, hey guys, it's Andrew, and welcome back for another episode of Every Town Where Today. We're diving into the story of Roche Thorold and the Anthill Kids, one of the most brutal cults that we've had the misfortune to witness. And if you think you're too smart to fall for something like this, well, you might want to think again. Because the scariest part isn't what Thorold did to his followers. It's how easily he convinced them all to let him do it. So, let's head up to Canada now and go inside the Anthill Kids cult. Evil takes time to grow. Like anything else in this life, it's a process that evolves over time. You want to get in better shape, you need to dedicate yourself to the gym for months and years to see results. If you want to get ahead in your career, it takes years to learn the ropes. And evil is the same, and often it starts out small in the most normal of places, but if left unchecked, it metastasizes. And that's exactly what happened to a smart kid in Quebec. Roche Thorold was born in 1947 in St. Epiphany, Quebec. He came from a large family, 7 kids in total. His folks raised them all to be good Catholics. When Roche was 6, they all moved to Thetford Mines, a mining city, of course, where his dad painted houses and his mom ran the household with religious precision. Every single Sunday, they all attended Mass, no exceptions. But Roche, well, he wasn't like the other kids. After church was out, when they all went to play outside, but you could find him with his nose buried in a Bible. He usually liked to gloss over all the boring things about love and forgiveness and head straight to the violent stuff. The Old Testament stories about God's wrath, the book of Revelation with its descriptions of the apocalypse raining down on humanity. Now, his family thought it was great, and he was being a good Catholic boy, but too much of anything, as they say, is never good. By the time he was 13, when most teens are worried about acne and crushes, Roche had convinced himself wholeheartedly that the end of the world was coming soon, and he was somehow special in God's plan because He understood that. His education ended in 7th grade, not because he was dumb, but because that's all the local school system offered. He kept teaching himself, diving deeper into religious texts, becoming more and more convinced that he had knowledge that other people didn't. His parents' religious devotion wasn't helping matters either. And his dad was involved with something called the Berets Blancs, a Catholic fringe group with fascist leanings. Young Roche would tag along on their door-to-door recruitment missions, watching his dad try to convert neighbors to their extreme beliefs. Now, looking back, neighbors remembered some disturbing things. One guy told local papers about a game the Thuralt family played called Bone. Father and son would sit at the kitchen table wearing thick work boots and kick each other as hard as they could until one of them gave up. That same neighbor described hearing Roche's mother screaming at the kids constantly.
I said, stop it.
Roche's father denied these claims later, but something was clearly warped in that household. At age 20, Roche married Francine Grenier. They moved to Montreal, had 2 sons, and seemed to be settling into a normal enough life. Except the part about how Roche controlled every aspect of Francine's appearance. What she wore, how she acted in public. You have to remember, he knew more than everybody else, and he wasn't afraid to let that be known. And first, he demanded modest dresses from his wife, then suddenly switched and made her wear miniskirts. And the rules kept changing, but the control was constant. And then came the health crisis that changed everything. Roche himself developed severe stomach ulcers that required surgery. And the pain was excruciating, and so he moved beyond just religious fanaticism, and he now became obsessed with medical textbooks, studying anatomy, developing theories about healing that had nothing to do with actual medicine. Roche truly thought he could figure things out better than the entire history of the medical community put together. Armed with even more confidence, no matter how delusional it was, and bounced around to a few Catholic organizations, clubs, and what have you, to try and enlighten them. But every time he just freaked them out more than anything, really rocked the boat, and so they'd kick him out. Now, most people who get rejected like that might feel embarrassed, maybe angry, or realize that they were being too pushy and changed their ways, but Roche didn't think like that. He certainly wasn't like most people. And he took it all as a sign that he was just on the wrong path, that all signs pointed to the fact that he needed to start his own thing completely from scratch. You know what doesn't belong in your epic summer plans? Getting burned by your old wireless bill. While you're planning backyard barbecues and long weekends on the beach, your cell phone bill shouldn't be the thing holding you back. That's why I made the switch to Mint Mobile, and honestly, I wish I'd done it sooner. With Mint, I'm getting the same reliable coverage and fast speeds I had with my old provider, but for a fraction of the price. And right now, they got a summer promo that's kind of wild. You can get 3 months of unlimited premium wireless service for just $15 a month. That means while your friends are sweating over data overages and surprise charges, you'll be chilling, literally and financially. Mint Mobile runs on the nation's largest 5G network, so the service is solid. And you keep your phone, your number, and all your contacts, while you're ditching is the bloated bill. And I use Mint Mobile, and you should too. And this year, skip breaking a sweat and breaking the bank. Get this new customer offer and your 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month at mintmobile.com/everytown. That's mintmobile.com/everytown. Upfront payment of $45 required, equivalent to $15 a month. Limited time new customer offer for first 3 months only. The speeds may slow above 35 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. In January of 1977, he converted to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This wasn't just changing denominations, it was a complete lifestyle overhaul. No alcohol or tobacco, no unhealthy food, strict rules about everything from diet to dress. And for someone who loved controlling others, it was perfect. Not because he wanted to follow the rules, but because he could use them to control people who did. So the Adventists loved him at first. Roche was magnetic when he spoke about faith and salvation. He could draw crowds, inspire conversations, and make people see the importance of the big picture and look beyond just themselves. But church leaders started noticing something weird. All the people Roche was converting and bringing into their church didn't seem all that interested in Adventist doctrine. They were more interested in Roche himself. They hung on his every word, treated him like he had special access to divine truth. Within the year, he had a core group of followers, mostly women who spent their weekends at the apartment of a woman named Giselle Lafranc, the first official member of what would become the Anthill Kids. And this is where Roche started calling himself Moses, claiming to be a reincarnation of the biblical prophet. He preached about the coming apocalypse and positioned himself as the only person who could lead them to salvation. His genius for recruitment really showed at a summer retreat on Lake Rousseau, the moment he met Gabrielle Lavalle. Now, she was a trained nurse, educated, supposedly smart enough to spot manipulation from afar. But like so many others, she was a person who was depressed and carrying the scars of childhood abuse and searching for direction. For her, Roche didn't pitch himself as some self-proclaimed prophet, at least not right away. Now, he played the role of a holistic healer with a practical vision, a wellness center where broken people could find help, and where Gabrielle could put her nursing skills to use. And he offered something she hadn't felt, real purpose. He made her feel needed, gave her a role in something bigger than the world she was so used to. When you get down to it, well, that's how cult recruitment actually works. It's not flashy or obvious. It's a slow, careful process of spotting exactly what someone's missing, be it purpose, belonging, healing, and then stepping in as the answer. Soon Roche had convinced his growing circle to quit their jobs or drop out of school, because according to him, there was no point. The world, you see, was going to end on February 19th of 1979. And things like careers or degrees, well, they don't mean a thing in God's kingdom. And then one after another, perfectly rational adults gave up their futures to follow a man who claimed he had a direct line to the divine. They set up the Healthy Living Clinic, supposedly an alternative medicine practice. Roche claimed his special remedies could cure any single illness. His followers wore matching uniforms, green tunics for women, beige ones for men. Only Roche stood apart, dressed in dark brown robes that marked his special status. But their clinic was really about two things: money and recruitment, of course. It generated income while allowing Roche to identify vulnerable people who might join his movement. Those who were dissatisfied with Western medicine and looking for more. It also gave Roche the opportunity to play doctor, which fed his growing obsession with controlling people. In March 1978, a woman named Geraldine Auckler came to the clinic. She had leukemia and was getting real medical treatment at a hospital in Quebec City. But her husband, looking at all possibilities to save his wife, stumbled upon Roche and became fascinated with his teachings. It was then pretty easy to convince the woman to abandon conventional medicine for the alternative approach they offered. And the treatment? Organic food and grape juice. That's it. Roche isolated her from family, banned visitors, and watched as her condition deteriorated very, very quickly. When Geraldine died, Roche faced his first real test as a leader. A normal person might feel guilt, maybe admit that they were wrong, but of course, he did something much smarter from a manipulation standpoint. And he created an elaborate story about resurrection, claiming Geraldine had briefly awakened when he kissed her forehead, but that God wanted her in heaven. So you see, he positioned her death not as his failure, but as proof of his special connection to the divine. His followers bought it. Nobody left, and they didn't question his abilities. If anything, this scenario only strengthened their devotion. This response taught Roche something crucial. He could justify anything, no matter how obviously wrong, even a death, by claiming it was part of God's plan. By April of 78, the Seventh-day Adventists had seen enough, and they officially excommunicated Roche and his followers, cutting all ties. You'd think that perhaps that would have been the end of it, but instead of tearing the group apart, the rejection only made them stronger. Roche spun this setback as proof that mainstream Christianity was corrupt, and that the only way to salvation was through his pure teachings that came direct from above. Around this time, his wife Giselle, who was pregnant and fed up with his constant affairs, saw an opportunity, and she gave him an ultimatum. Either disband and give up on the commune altogether, or lose her. How dare she talk to the supreme leader in this way? So he smacked her around a bit and locked her in a room for days so she could reevaluate her thoughts. And with police sniffing around after Geraldine's death and the Adventists no longer supplying food or medical supplies to the group, bills were piling up as they tried to run their clinic on their own, and they needed something new. Roche's solution was extreme: take everyone into the Canadian wilderness and build a commune where they could prepare for the apocalypse together without outside interference. So in June, 16 people followed their Moses into the remote forests of eastern Quebec. He called the place Eternal Mountain. They lived in tents while building log cabins for permanent housing. The plan was for a big communal building with a well in the center, but reality was much more primitive. And this is where the group actually got its name. Roche, who did no physical labor himself, watched his followers work constantly and compared them to ants on an anthill, the anthill kids. It perfectly captured how he saw them, not as people, but as insects, whose only purpose was serving him. Gabrielle would later say it felt like being trapped in the worst kind of prison, one without bars, where the chains were all in their minds. The love bombing that had drawn these people in vanished, replaced now by exhaustion, constant hunger, and a creeping sense of dread. And not so much because the end of the world was coming, but because Roche was acting stranger and stranger with each passing day. As the leader, he kept them deliberately sleep-deprived and underfed, because when you're starving and running on no sleep, clear thinking isn't really an option. As the so-called doomsday drew closer, Roche dropped any pretense of being a spiritual leader. He announced a new rule that made his true motives crystal clear. All existing marriages were now void, except for his. From that moment on, every woman in the group would be his wife. He held the ceremonies himself and consummated each one right away. Within a few years, he would father 26 children with 9 different women. On February 19, 1979 came and went, no apocalypse. When confused followers questioned what happened, well, Roche had a ready explanation. Time worked differently in God's world versus Earth time, so it was just a miscalculation, not a false prophecy. His infallibility had to be maintained at all costs. Instead of walking away, most of his followers just accepted his explanations without a second thought. By this time, they were fully brainwashed, and some of their parents were worried enough to reach out to authorities. Yes, these were adults, but after enough of them had expressed concern about this group out in the woods, well, police went on in to take a second look. It was a weird thing to see, a bunch of hippies doing their thing, but no one who was actually there dared to complain. Roche willingly then went in for a psychiatric evaluation, and news of the commune hit the mainstream airwaves. You'd think the professionals would have caught on once the test was completed. The results would surely show just how out of his mind Roche had become, except that didn't happen at all. Instead, the lead psychiatrist held a press conference in which he praised Roche as a model back-to-the-land religious leader. This professional endorsement gave Roche a well-needed boost in credibility amongst his followers, and also fed his growing belief that he truly was chosen by God. Now, after surviving challenges from the church, his wife, concerned parents, and even medical professionals, Roche began to believe his own propaganda. So really, there was only one way for this whole thing to play out, and things went downhill fast. Away from civilization and normal social rules, with followers who had already proven they'd sacrifice everything for his approval, Roche began experimenting with more extreme forms of control. The transformation accelerated more when he abandoned his healthy Adventist lifestyle and started drinking heavily. The man who had preached about pure living became a violent drunk who used his followers' bodies as outlets for his rage and sick fantasies. He forced everyone to sit through drunken sermons that lasted for hours, beating anyone who fell asleep with pieces of wood. And speaking of that, Roche's punishments evolved into systematic torture. People who displeased him were handed sledgehammers and made to smash their own legs till they broke the bones. They were made to sit on lit stoves, shoot each other in the shoulders. He made them eat dead mice and human waste, and used wire cutters to remove fingers and toes as loyalty tests. And the small children weren't safe either. Roche abused them in the same sort of ways. Sometimes he'd nail them to trees while other kids threw rocks at the victims. It got so insane that one of his wives left a newborn outside to freeze to death, rather than bring the baby inside to face the abuse. And beyond all that, Roche also had this thing where he performed amateur surgeries. He claimed these operations proved his healing powers, but they were really just elaborate torture sessions. He'd inject pure alcohol into people's stomachs, perform circumcisions with whatever tools were around, all without any anesthesia, while other members held the victims down. The nightmare reached its peak in 1981 with the death of 2-year-old Samuel Guguer. A new member named Guy Veer was struggling with depression and living in a tool shed as the group's lowest-ranking member. When Samuel's crying woke him up, Guy beat the child so badly that Samuel fell into a coma. Instead of getting medical help, Roche decided circumcision would cure the boy. And he performed the procedure himself on a kitchen table, using alcohol as a form of anesthesia, and Samuel died the next morning from alcohol poisoning. And not even this horror brought an end to the cult, because even the little boy's death was woven into the narrative and twisted theater. He staged a mock trial with cult members acting as judge and jury. A guy was found not guilty by reason of insanity, but he didn't get off scot-free. Roche decided that a castration would be the correct form of punishment, and through manipulation and psychological pressure, he actually convinced Guy to agree to this mutilation. Well, after it happened, Guy ended up leaving. I guess it finally hit him that if he stayed, he was likely going to die. He headed for civilization, and once there, went straight to the police station. He told the authorities about Samuel's death, Police then raided the commune and arrested several members, including Roche. The conditions they found were so awful that 9 children were immediately taken away and put in foster care. The medical examiner confirmed that Samuel had been murdered. And at trial, 6 cult members were found guilty on various charges, though Roche only got 2 years in prison and 3 years probation for criminal negligence. Still, though, the commune was shut down, the buildings burned, and everyone was kicked off the property. So that was the official end of the Anthill Kids, or so most people thought. When Roche got out of prison in February of '84, he discovered something incredible. His hold over his followers was still unbroken. Despite everything that had happened, despite the horrible conditions that led to his imprisonment, a core group of devoted disciples was waiting for him. They lost most of their children to social services and had no money, but their faith and their prophet remained intact. Roche decided to start over with a new commune near Burnt River, Ontario. The group now had 10 children, 2 men and 9 women, most of them pregnant with his babies. But their financial situation was desperate. Roche solved this by forcing his followers to shoplift food and supplies. He even had special pockets sewn into their clothes to help them steal more efficiently. So he picked up right where he left off, began drinking heavily again, and created conditions for even worse abuse than before. He made a rule that cult members couldn't talk to each other when he wasn't around. Roche had evolved into a true sadist who needed absolute control to feel powerful. He spied constantly, confronted people claiming God had revealed their sins, and administered punishments limited only to his imagination. Mutilation with wire cutters, forced violence between members, bizarre exorcisms, and surgical torture disguised as healing. Which leads us to September of 1988. One of his wives, Solange Bollard, complained about stomach pain, and Roche got excited about the chance to perform another surgery. He told Solange her liver was infected and needed immediate treatment. He forced her onto the kitchen table and gave her an enema and punched her stomach repeatedly. He then put a tube down her throat and made other members blow air into it. Now, the full extent of what went down next is too harsh for me to even describe, but it involved a kitchen knife, intestines, and bare hands, all while she was awake and aware. Solange didn't make it to see the following morning. In his utter derangement, he attempted to bring her back to life in the following days, digging up the body and performing some twisted rituals that made no logical sense. It truly is insane what he was able to get away with without people leaving. But the end of this sick cult finally came in July of 1989. Gabrielle Lavalle complained about an issue with her hand being in pain. Roche had her show it to him while he examined it on the table. And then out of nowhere, he plunged a knife into it, pinning her right there. He let her sit helpless for hours, and when he returned, removed the arm entirely. No hand, no more problem. Bleeding profusely, she fled into the woods and eventually made it to a hospital, where she told doctors and police about the years of torture and medical mutilation. Her detailed testimony led to a massive investigation that would finally end Roche's reign of terror once and for all. And knowing the police would come, the cult fled. The police tracked them down, Roche and several followers, to Quebec, where they arrested him after a 6-week manhunt. At trial, he received life for Solange's murder, plus 12 years for Gabrielle's amputation. Even in prison, though, Roche couldn't resist exploiting his notoriety. In 2009, he tried selling artwork through a true crime auction website until authorities blocked it. And this whole story ended February 26, 2011, when cellmate Matthew McDonald had had enough of Roche's ramblings. And he stabbed him in the neck with a homemade weapon and didn't even try to hide it. He just said, "That piece of ish is down on the range. Here's the knife. I've sliced him up." But the questions this case raises don't die with Roche Thurall. It's not so cut and dry. Now, how does someone become capable of such evil? Most importantly, how do rational adults allow systematic destruction by someone they chose to follow? The answer lies in understanding that many things that turn out to be evil take time to evolve, and they slowly draw people in. It's so slow, in fact, that they don't even realize it's happening. Remember, Roche didn't start by asking people to break their own legs. He began by offering purpose and a spiritual community. Each step toward submission was small enough to seem reasonable, given what came before. His followers weren't weak or stupid. Many were educated professionals seeking meaning, struggling with trauma, looking for something authentic. Roche's genius was identifying these needs and presenting himself as the solution, then gradually escalating demands while maintaining the illusion of free choice. That's how these things work. Not through obvious red flags, but through meeting genuine human needs in ways that create dependence. And you think you're sharp enough not to fall into the clutches of a cult? But maybe you've already fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker, only you don't know it yet, and the worst is yet to come. The honest truth is that under the right circumstances and with the right kind of persuasion, we're all vulnerable. Hopefully, you're able to see it and steer clear before it's too late. That's going to do it for this week's episode of Every Town. If you want more content like this, check the links down in the description. Full podcast episodes, exclusive videos, and our feature-length movie and Angry Boys streaming now. Thanks for being here today. Remember to come back next week for another episode filled with scary, strange, and mysterious stories. Because you never know. Maybe your town will be next.